Morning all. How are you all, team?
Good morning, well, thank you.
Good morning, good morning. Testing 1, 2, David Crisafulli and Tim Mander. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All good? Yet again, another of the state government's signature housing projects has collapsed. And today the opposition can reveal that 2 years since the announcement of the Help to Home project, a project designed to find dwellings for 1,000 vulnerable Queenslanders, just 55 have been delivered. Help to Home has collapsed and it's become a hoax for those looking for help. And this is a repeated theme that we are seeing with the state government, always quick to make an announcement, but nobody is following through. No one has the attention to detail and the discipline to follow through the programs that they've outlined. And in a moment, Tim will explain why that matters to Queenslanders. Before I hand over to Tim, I just want to make some comments regarding the youth crime crisis that continues in this state. And the scenes that we saw yesterday on the M1 are absolutely unacceptable. You already have a city of hundreds of thousands at the mercy of one road. Well, now they're at the mercy of a couple of alleged criminals who know that the law is an absolute joke. Stories of friends and colleagues having to spend hours stuck in a car when they wanted to get home to their family, trying to rat run through the back of cane fields just to avoid a generation of young thugs who just know that the law is completely broken. And until the state government starts listening to the solutions and getting serious about embedding them, this is going to become business as usual. People held at mercy in their homes, at their businesses, now on highways because of a generation of repeat alleged young criminals who just know that their rights are greater than the rights of the victim. And today I can reveal another failing, and that is the government's so-called signature GPS ankle bracelets, which was the signature project that came out of the second last version of so-called tough amendments. In the 2 years since that announcement, just 14 young crims have been fitted with these GPS bracelets. Just 14. 7 in Logan and the Gold Coast, 4 in Metro North, and just 3 in Townsville. We called it from day one. This project was never going to work the way the legislation was drafted. There were so many caveats that allowed young people not to want to wear them and get away with that. To have just 14 in 2 years shows that this was another announcement without any follow-through. Queensland is in the grip of a youth crime crisis, and every solution the government has put forward is broken because it is not listening to the holistic programs that are needed. Consequences for actions, unshackle the judiciary and remove detention as a last resort, and get serious about gold standard early intervention. They are the solutions. And for the government to just cherry-pick one project here and one project there, and they wonder why crime continues to escalate, shows that they aren't listening to the Queenslanders whose lives are being turned upside down. Tim.
Thanks, David. Well, another day, another failed Labor housing policy. 2 years ago, the government made what they called a signature announcement in housing, and that was the Help to Home program. Their aim was to have 1,000 homes for the private rental market given over to the social housing portfolio. Their record today, with 1 month to go before that offer closes, is 55 homes. 55 homes out of a target of 1,000. This is, on anybody's standard, an abject failure. And we're hearing this time and time again with basically every significant policy they have announced about housing. Whether it's the Griffith University student accommodation, that collapsed. Whether it's investment from the Housing Investment Fund, any properties being built, that has collapsed. Whether it was the Greenie Flat announcement, that has collapsed. Whether it's the lowest spend per capita on social housing in the nation, again, Queensland has taken that mantle. This policy was destined to fail from the beginning. To think in the middle of a rental housing crisis that they would gain another 1,000 properties out of that market into the social housing portfolio was always destined for failure. This week, the new minister is going on a PR exercise every day making an announcement. Well, announcements and photos do not house people. The Minister said herself that success is delivering on the promises they make. By her own measure, they are failing miserably, and the people that are suffering are vulnerable Queenslanders.
Do you think it shows that the government's overly ambitious with its housing strategy, or is it just simply playing the smell for constituents?
Well, when it comes to housing policy, they overpromise and underdeliver. And it's another example, as we talked about yesterday with tenancy laws, of not thinking through the consequences of policy announcements. I mean, we have a private rental vacancy rate of less than 1%. To think that they would get 1,000 homes out of that market into the social housing portfolio was never going to happen. In fact, that policy makes the private rental crisis worse. So it's another policy that hasn't been well thought through. Well, it confirms that they never thought about that in the first place. Now, don't take this line that there wasn't a private rental crisis at the time of the announcement. It was. It's been bad for the last 2 years. So to come out now and say that, no, it's got worse, is a poor excuse for what was a policy that was never well thought out.
Do you think, looking at when the government's trying to unlock more land and build more properties, do you think there's enough focus on regional Queensland? Because we see so many towns that are running out more families to join local industry or join small businesses there. Do you think there needs to be a greater focus on building more properties in regional Queensland?
Look, this housing crisis is evident right across the state. And in lots of ways, it's regional Queensland that feels it the most because they're trying to get workers and skilled people to live in their towns and cities. And they can't do that. They can't attract people because they do not have the accommodation to do that. So that's the impact that it has economically. But of course, the other impact is that we still have many, many vulnerable people that are sleeping in cars, sleeping in tents, couch surfing, and that's clearly unacceptable.
The Reserve Bank governor the other day, his comments around increasing density, more people in each dwelling. Is there merit to that? Are we getting too precious with our living arrangements? Do we need to go back to the days of shared housing?
Well, that announcement is a consequence of not having enough houses. That's where the issue lies. We simply don't have enough supply. And the government has not, and they were criticised by the Auditor General in a very significant way, they have no targets. They have no forecasting. They haven't forecast over the last couple of years the increased demand. That shows a government that's chaotic and in crisis and simply doesn't plan.
I just might, Kate, on one thing you raised, which is spot on about the pressure that's in the market already. That's all the more reason why the laser-like focus should be not cannibalising the existing market, but increasing supply and delivering on those targets for social housing. That's the only way to fix it. This announcement, the reason why Tim called it out at the time was it was always destined to just put more pressure on already existing limited stock. The problem is a lack of stock, and we've put forward our solutions, starting with infrastructure to open up new opportunities for young people to get into the market or be able to afford to rent, ambitious targets with the community housing sector, and for governments to deliver on social housing. Lots of talk about record funding, but there has not been an increase in stock that's even close to matching demand. 70% increase in demand, less than 2% increase in supply of social housing in nearly a decade of this government's time in office. It shows that we have a generation of untouchables who know that their rights outweigh the rights of victims. And until there are consequences for actions, until detention is able to be put back on the table, and until early intervention turns people around, this is going to be business as usual.
What's the measuring, the measurement, I guess, though, of success? Would it be less arrests and charges or more?
People feeling safe in their homes and their businesses, and they're not at the moment. and they're not in more and more parts of Queensland, and we have to redouble our efforts to make them feel safe. The primary responsibility of a government is to keep the community safe, and at the moment, on any measure, that is breaking down. And the government continues to grab little bits and pieces along the way, and I've announced today about how much of a failure the GPS trackers are. Well, that was because it was done in a knee-jerk way. No attention to detail, no following through, no plan as a holistic solution from the moment someone comes into their first interaction with the law to when they become a repeat offender. No holistic focus on those who are in child safety and running off the rails. The government is at chaos with itself, and Queenslanders don't feel safe in their homes, in their businesses, and now on a motorway. That's where things have reached in Queensland.
Whose responsibility is it to apply a GPS tracking to?
Well, if you read the legislation, there's a couple of reasons why a young offender cannot be fitted with one. One is that their home environment isn't conducive to wearing one. One is that there isn't enough reception for it, some phone reception. But the third, and the one that makes me shake my head the most, is that a young offender can choose just not to want to wear one. It's not a fashion accessory. It's supposed to be a law and order crime-fighting tool. And these young offenders are thumbing their nose at weak laws and a government without the attention to detail to deliver a safe community.
Is there evidence to suggest that they work?
Say that again?
Is there evidence to suggest that they actually work?
Well, it was the government's signature plan. That was the flagship of the last version. I think that one was an 8-point plan, but there's been half a dozen, so you could be, you might have to excuse me if I've got the number mixed up with one of the others, but it was the signature policy following the tragedy that we saw in the Redlands. And it was done in a chaotic scramble, as the last one was. So the signature plan of the last one was engine immobilisers, and we look forward to seeing how many of them will be rolling out. Well, this signature project was GPS trackers. It's been 2 years, and there's 14 been fitted. If that doesn't show you a plan that is lying in ruins, I don't know what does.
So would the LNP policy be to do away with them or to apply them?
We want a complete solution when it comes to youth crime. And I'm not going to suggest that there's one tool that will solve it. There's no magic formula. But if you start by rewriting the Youth Justice Act and making consequences for actions matter, if you remove detention as a last resort, and if you get serious about early intervention and turning kids around, well then things like GPS trackers, things like breach of bail, those things can have a difference. They can turn it around. But while governments are at chaos and crisis, picking little bits here and there, you're going to continue to have youth crime as business as usual in this state, ripping the heart out of communities. And it is communities across the state, from the far north to the Isa, border towns like Gundy, north and south of Brisbane, both coasts, and it all started in Townsville when the laws were watered down 8 years ago. It's a generation of untouchables.
When looking at early intervention, do you think there needs to be maybe more of a focus on positive police interactions with younger people in schools, particularly schools that say have a higher rate of dropouts?
I think that's a noble suggestion, and it's one that we should look at, as are things like PCYCs. I think the greatest way to turn a young kid around is to give them help and hope and to put education front and centre. And that doesn't mean that there's not a generation who are now, in the here and now, the hardcore, carrying knives, ramming police cars. Well, they've been the product of 8 years of weakened laws. Now, they have to be dealt with, and they have to be dealt with hard and now. But there's a pipeline coming through, and we have to turn those kids around. And I've looked at quite a few programs that involve giving education options and making sure that those interactions with police are done frequently, and there are some models that work. But at the moment in Queensland, we don't know where the money's being spent. Clearly what it's being spent on at the moment across the board isn't working. So let's work out what's good, and we need to do a lot more of, what's not working, and what's best of breed from throughout the globe, and let's get it here and let's make early intervention matter.
In the United States, they have some programs in schools where they bring classes to prisons and they interact with prisoners. And
Yep.
I guess first-hand experience of what prison is like, do you think that would ever be an option yet?
Well, the Auditor General's report showed that there is no visibility about what is happening in terms of the success of programs within prisons, and that was deeply troubling. You've got to find a way to turn people around and at all parts of that journey of crime. And if somebody is going to be rehabilitated, that involves education. And sometimes that involves education within prisons. Sometimes that means disconnecting them from where the problem is emanating and ensuring that they can get help at programs like on-country programs. But one way or another, we just can't keep doing what we're doing because it isn't working. And you're seeing examples across the state every day of what happens when laws are watered down and a generation of young crims know that their rights are greater than the rights of the victims. They are untouchable in the eyes of the law, and it has to change.
What's a time frame to be releasing some of the LNP's policies for early intervention? Will it be right up until an election campaign?
We'll keep listening the whole way through. I can give you an example of one that I saw just the other day that I'd love to see more of. It's called Men of Business, and it's happening at Southport. It's a program that turns around young men, grade 10, 11 and 12, who are at the last chance saloon, and they get them in and they love them, they respect them, they educate them, and the success rate in finding those young men jobs is incredible. Now, that is one program in one city, and the amount of support that they receive in terms of early intervention funding is next to nothing. Now, that's done as an education program. There's just one example. Now, we'll be speaking a lot about those programs in the months and years ahead, but rest assured it starts with rewriting the Youth Justice Act at one end and getting serious about early intervention at the other.
Neil Scales, wish him well.
Of course.
Job well done, no doubt.
Well, I'll make the point that it's quite alarming that an announcement would be made at night and then the next day a Director General who's been there a decade is finished. Well, Tim looks after procurement for us. You might want to comment. You have interactions with the CFMEU. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, one of my shadow ministries is Public Works, and Public Works looks after procurement. And of course, the Transport and Main Roads Department is one of the largest procurer of services for the government. I'm in total shock about Neil Scales' departure. To serve government for the last 10 years well, and to basically be removed, and let's call it straight, removed within 24 hours, beggars belief. Let's call a spade a spade. The CFMEU got their man. They stormed the Transport and Main Roads building, demanding his resignation, terrorising public servants as they did it. They've had protest after protest outside here at 1 William Street, demanding that he goes. The Premier says that her and the ministers do not meet with the CFMEU. Well, I tell you what, they've still got influence, and they got their man today. It makes me wonder, what does Neil Scales know that Mark Bailey doesn't want revealed at estimates? Because for him to go within 24 hours after 10 years service smells. And I can only come to the conclusion that the CFMEU got the person they wanted. Well, you'll have to ask him that, and he's being a true public servant and not saying anything. But you ask the question yourself. Somebody that has served in the highest position in the Transport and Main Roads Department for 10 years, is well respected by industry, to go within 24 hours, it smells. And with all the other things that have happened in the background with regards to the CFMEU wanting his head, I think Mark Bailey and the Premier have submitted to the CFMEU, and it shows you that the Labor government is still run by the trade union movement.
Could I just ask one drought-related question? There was some lifting some drought declarations in the past 24 hours. I know that impacts some of the funding benefits that will use farmers get. Do we think that was the best timing, guys, given that all the forecasts suggest we're heading back into drought this season?
Well, I'll have to get details on that, Joel. but I'll make some comments in general. The focus on government should be long-term resilience for people on the land. And it's absolutely essential that in times of disaster we sweep in and do all we can, in flood and drought and bushfire, but we also have to get serious about building that resilience for them. And if we do that, and if we have a long-term focus, that can help mitigate against the challenges that come with living in a disaster-ravaged state.
We always seem slow to apply the declarations.
Yeah.
And perhaps lift them at the wrong time.
Yeah, it's always been a frustration of mine that the timing is always difficult when it comes to declaring for disasters. I just want people who live and work on the land to know that we've got their back, and it's important that we step in and help whenever we can, and that we stay for the long haul, but also that we work on helping them long term to make them more resilient. It's a must. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see them having to pick up the pieces more frequently and from a deeper dive every time.
Star Casino is a lot of the sentence today for following that, like the investigation. Do you think the fact that Yvette has, as many politicians from both sides of politics have had interactions with Star, how do you think that will sit with Queenslanders?
Well, Queenslanders will make their own mind up about that, but the new old Attorney-General has had many opportunities to clear that up. There's a pretty simple question. How is a conflict of interest being managed that is a massive conflict of interest? And Queenslanders will see a government that in its third term does not conduct itself the way that it once did. It was elected on a platform of transparency and accountability, and to know that no one has revealed what processes are being put in place to manage a massive conflict of interest that matters to Queenslanders, well, that just shows you that the government conducts itself with a cavalier attitude that says, we know best.
Do you think the fact that those findings found that it'll be the plus the appointment of a special manager, do you think given that perceived conflicts that there should be a special manager put in place? The AG's department runs what has interactions with staff.
Well, what is the government's plan to manage the conflict? There is a real conflict there, and the fact that not only has there not been a plan put in place, but the government hasn't even acknowledged how serious this issue is, it shows you that they are hell-bent on riding out issues and conducting itself in a way that says, well, if we ignore it, eventually it will go away. But this problem isn't going to go away. It's serious, and it matters to the state because it is an important part of the state. So how are conflicts being managed? They are real, they exist, and the Minister had all week in Parliament to reveal how they are being managed and chose the cloak and dagger and secrecy approach. Well, time's running out, and today the government needs to explain to Queenslanders how those conflicts of interest are being managed and how people will be treated fairly in this process. Good.
Thank you very
Thank you all.
much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
See you guys. Thank you.